Welcome to Monday of Holy Week. Thank you for joining me in these daily reflections. I want to mention again that I'm indebted to Jason Porterfield in his book, Fight Like Jesus, that you see there on the screen, for many of the insights that I'm sharing with you. Well, we have seen that Jesus came into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday with one thing on his mind: peace. By weeping out of his longing for the people to know what would bring them peace, and by riding humbly into the city on a donkey, Jesus made clear what his mission was in this final week: to bring shalom to the world. But then he seems to ruin everything on Monday. I don't know, maybe all the pressure finally got to him, or maybe his disciples got under his skin, or maybe he was just run down. But when he walked into the temple, he flew off the handle. He turned over tables. He chased out animals. He pulled out a whip and lashed anyone who got in his way. And the ripple effect of Jesus' temple tantrum is that down through history, his followers have sometimes used his example to justify their own violent actions when they got righteously angry. But what if we've missed the whole point of this story? What if instead of finding a justification for our holy crusades, Jesus is showing us how he battles for peace and how he calls us to do the same? So let's briefly notice three things about our Shalom Warrior on this Holy Monday. First, what was it that made Jesus angry? Well, for one thing, the temple merchants had set up shop in the temple's outer court, the only part of the temple open to non-Jewish foreigners. God intended for the temple to be a place of radical welcome to all, but the religious profiteers had turned this outer court into a noisy open-air market, making it impossible for outsiders who were genuinely seeking God to pray. But Jesus also got angry when he saw how the heart of temple worship had become commercialized. For instance, the surcharge that the money changers added brought in enough profit to pay for all the gold plating used to cover the sanctuary of the temple. The price gouging of these temple merchants lined the pockets of the priestly families and robbed the poor of their scarce resources. And all of this was happening in the temple, the place that was supposed to reflect the heart of God. Can you understand why Jesus got angry? Then second, notice how Jesus planned before he acted. And this is a detail we often overlook. Mark's gospel makes it clear that after Jesus rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, he went right into the temple and looked around at everything. Then, because it was late in the day, he left and spent the night with friends in the nearby town of Bethany. Instead of responding impulsively then and there, Jesus waited. He prayed. He devised a plan. And when he came back on Monday, what we see is not a reckless emotional outburst. Jesus' actions were deliberate, calculated, purposeful. Then third, let's look at Jesus' actions. The Gospels describe how Jesus drove out the sellers and turned over their tables. But John is the only one who adds this detail. Jesus made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. This picture, more than any other, leads to the perception that Jesus acted violently. But notice, John says that Jesus made the whip once he was already in the temple, and he made it out of cords. The word for cords is literally rushes or reeds, akin to wicker material. Now, where would Jesus have found these materials in the temple? Well, the prevailing theory is that it was the rushes that were used for the bedding of the animals being sold there. By repeatedly striking the ground with his makeshift whip, Jesus could have easily shooed those animals away. But if he had wildly waved this flimsy wicker whip at people, they would have fallen over laughing instead of fleeing in fear. Jesus didn't need to use violence. By driving out the sheep and the cattle, the merchants would have gone chasing after their livelihood. Well, not only were Jesus' actions well calculated, so were his words. These words quoted from 2 Old Testament prophets. Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers? And so, at least for this day, the temple's commercial operations came to a halt. And by sending away the perpetrators of injustice, Jesus made room for the excluded to be welcomed in. Because the very next thing Matthew's gospel tells us is that the blind and the lame, people marginalized from temple worship, came in and were healed. So what we see on Monday of Holy Week is not Jesus lashing out in violence. We see him fighting for peace, for shalom, for the restoration of what was broken. Let me close with this quote from Jason Porterfield. Jesus revealed what true zeal for God looks like. Truly righteous zeal is constructive, not destructive. It lifts others up instead of tearing them down. Instead of injuring, it heals. Instead of destroying, it restores. And above all, truly righteous zeal is motivated by self-giving love, not other-consuming hatred. That's what it looks like, not just for Jesus, but for all of us who claim to follow him, to fight for shalom, for peace. Well, the religious authorities aren't going to take this lying down. Join me tomorrow as they launch a counterattack. Until then, I again leave you with this prayer. The peace of Christ be with you. Amen.